Now, today is going to be really interesting, and I've been wanting to do one of these with Steph for a while, so hopefully it's going to be great. So first of all, Steph, thank you ever so much for joining us today. The first question I'm going to put to you, why memorabilia? What on earth got you into this market?
Oh, I love memorabilia. So I've worked in the business for over 20 years in general, but memorabilia, well, when you're a kid, you can't imagine that you could handle all the things that you can see in a film, that you can, the musicians that you love, you can handle the instruments that they play. So I first handled memorabilia properly when I was working at an auction house as a general valuer. And we had a collection of letters that were from Lily Langtry. If you've never heard of her, she was an Edwardian actress. She was the mistress of Edward VII. And it was the letters from Edward VII to her, and then another gentleman she was having an affair with as well. So that was my first taste of kind of memorabilia, because it was theatrical and royal. But then after that, I then started working, due to that really, I think, at Bonhams in their memorabilia department. And in the end, I was the head of the memorabilia department. And I think it was because I had a massive passion for music, film, and all things memorabilia. I studied film at university a bit as well. So I just love it. I can't tell you how much I love memorabilia. I just really do.
Fantastic. And now, I think with a lot of things, and it has been so in the last few years with places like Prop Store and stuff like that, a lot more stuff is coming to the fore now, isn't it? And we're seeing so many interesting articles come through, and things that you didn't think existed. And to be honest, sometimes I doubt it even did exist. And Indiana Jones fedora, things like that, the one that, as you say, when you're a kid, those are the kind of things you think, God, how am I ever going to be able to handle these things? And, I think we've both been pretty lucky in handling some very, very cool things. But it seems to be the last kind of 10, 20 years, it's almost like it's competing with the art market now for people to invest in things like this and actually looking at them going, oh gosh, isn't this great? And it's probably a worthwhile thing to invest in.
Yeah, I think the thing with memorabilia for me is there's not really any kind of canon of knowledge. So when you're looking at furniture or fine pictures, people sometimes get intimidated because you're expected to have a kind of level of knowledge before you get to the market. If you're looking at memorabilia, chances are, if you love the Beatles, you already love them. If you love a film like James Bond, you already love it. So you already invested from childhood really in that market. And I think because it's kind of a great leveler, it means that people can enter at any level and they already kind of understand what the objects in the market are without necessarily having to go away and do a lot of research or kind of feel intimidated by the market itself. When the memorabilia auctions first started in the early 1980s, I think people were a little bit snobby about the fact it wasn't fine art or antiques. But since then, if you look at the big auction houses, memorabilia is starting to be a bigger and bigger focus and a bigger and bigger draw for audiences to go and buy.
And I think the great thing about it is as well, it's a huge unknown, because if you look at some of the pieces that come up, for example, I mean, if you look at a chest of drawers, even a very, very good one, you kind of have a rough idea what it's going to make, because next week, I hate to say it, will be something else that comes along that's relatively similar in most cases. But with memorabilia, you can put an estimate of 5 to 10 grand on it. It'll go and make 50 grand and nobody would blink at it, because it's all about that personal connection with the item that the person who is potentially buying it has got, hasn't it?
Yeah, you can't really put a price on that. And because of a lot of it, with some types of memorabilia, it's a nostalgia market. So you can't, if somebody then becomes wealthy, you cannot interpret how important a piece is to two people who are now extremely wealthy, and that might be their most treasured possession they could possibly own. So I think it is slightly different than other markets, because you do have that kind of adoration factor, and if the strong force that something can hold in someone's heart, that doesn't necessarily happen with art and antiques in general.
I mean, I think we used to find, many years ago, before the whole kind of musical memorabilia thing and film memorabilia thing kind of erupted, that the only memorabilia that you generally see in people's houses is sports memorabilia or football shirts in people who have decided to build a bar in their house or something and put some football shirts up and things like that. That was the only kind of thing that was there. But recently, people are, dedicating, instead of having a good painting on the wall, they will have some lyrics, or they will have a set list, or they will have a guitar even.
Yeah, and that's true. And I think I was going to talk to you first about movie posters, and that's very true with people starting having home cinemas, because
Yeah.
people want the real deal. They want the creme poster. They want the very good poster from their favorite films, or the ones that indicate that they are a cinephile, that they kind of know what they're talking about in cinema to their friends when they're coming to their home cinema. So that's meant that the market has broadened for posters in general, but also, as you say, for props, for memorabilia. And people do have them in their homes or buy them as an investment. But mostly people, I've always found, rather than buying them as an investment, buy them because they love them. There is a personal connection between the object and them. So and it can be for different reasons. It can be for nostalgia reasons, or it can be to culturally show you kind of know what you're talking about, or because you are in the business. You get a lot of the serious collectors are people that work in the music industry, film business, or sports business themselves, and therefore it influences what they collect.
Right. Shall we have a look at some things then, Steph?
Yeah, let's. So the first thing I was going to talk to you about, if we can have slide 1. Weirdly, we were talking about breakfast at Tiffany's, because
Absolutely.
I've got the poster on the wall. So this was just to talk to you a bit about, a lot of people when they're going to clients' houses, they might see the movie poster because it is the kind of instantly recognizable thing from a film, accessible, people understand what they are. So this one is a what we call a US one sheet format for breakfast at Tiffany's. So different countries have different formats of posters, and each one's specific to that country. And also it affects the price. So if you're looking at a poster from a film where which is the country of origin of the movie, so in this case, Breakfast at Tiffany's is a Hollywood film. This is an American poster. That would mean normally that it's most valuable. If you're looking at Bond, say, because that's British made, the British poster is the most valuable. If you were looking at La Dolce Vita poster, because that's an Italian film, the Italian is the most valuable. So with this one, it was to talk to you really about historically important films. The thing with Breakfast at Tiffany's is it's a big crossover market. So there's people that collect it because of the fashion. Hubert de Givenchy, in combination with Edith Head, did the costumes for Breakfast at Tiffany's. So people that connect Givenchy and fashion buy it for that reason. This poster artwork was by a gentleman called Robert McGuinness, who's one of the most important movie poster artists. He created a lot of the most famous images of Sean Connery that you'll see on posters, and he's collectible in his own right. His original work can make over 200,000 US dollars. So it depends on what you've got. I picked this one just because it is a more common one that you would see in a reasonably good collection of movie posters. This poster is from 1961. If you were trying to buy it in the mid 1990s, it was still collectible then, but you'd have been looking at paying about £1,500 then if you'd have bought it in about 1995. Because poster prices since that time have continued to increase, if you bought it at auction, this one sold for $6,250. I'll explain to you why it made a little bit less than you might have anticipated. A good example of this poster, you're really looking at over 10 grand now. So where you could have bought it 25, 30 years ago for sort of £1,500, it's now going to be about £10,000.
What size is this? You told us the American format, but is it a specific size in centimetres or inches? Or
yeah, so in inches, they're always measured in inches posters because they were produced that way, especially British and American. This one is 27 by 41 inches. British posters are a horizontal format rather than a vertical, so a bit like your laptop screen, and they're 30 by 40 inches. They'd normally be folded because that's how they were sent. You get a catalogue, so you could pick at the cinema what posters you wanted for the release, and then they'd be sent to you through the post. So you'll normally find when you're looking at posters that they're folded. This one had been what we call linen backed. So if you're trying to preserve a poster, often owners will have it put on a conservation linen backing, which is a very hard canvas backing. It stops a poster tearing and prevents it from damage in the future, in the hope of making it last longer. The one thing I will say about linen backing, though, is it can hide a multitude of sins. So just be careful, because people restore on top of the linen backing, which you can't do with a poster not on linen. This one had been restored on the folds, and it had knocks and losses on the right-hand side margin, I believe. So that means it's not getting up to that £10,000 level, because it's got a little bit of restoration. So it's just something to look out for. US one-sheet posters, though, they can fetch hundreds of thousands of pounds. If you're looking at the early Universal horror film posters, so that's Frankenstein, Dracula, The Invisible Man from the 1930s, they're kind of upwards of £100,000.
So that original golden age of cinema, or the really, really early point of cinema, are still the most valuable ones, despite, Breakfast at Tiffany's and that kind of 60s and 70s Hollywood kind of thing. The most valuable ones are still that really, really early kind of period of cinema.
Yeah, I think if you look at the type of people that collect that, those early horror films have got their antiques now almost. They're nearly 100 years old in some cases. They are very influential on the history of cinema. So for serious movie people, they're the linchpin that would be why they went off to make the film that they made. It will be because they saw Frankenstein on the telly in the 60s or whatever. But also because of the scarcity. Those posters are extremely rare. And they have proven to be a reasonably good investment if you look at the way the prices have increased time over time. The 60s and 70s posters are interesting because they were kind of a little bit overlooked in the 90s, but now the prices are starting to go up, which is the same with posters now from the 80s. So if we can look at the second slide. So this is a poster for E.T. It's a lot of people's favourite childhood film. This again is a US one-sheet movie poster. This one is a rare version because it's full size for this particular poster. In about 20 years ago, you could pick this poster up at auction for about £750. Now, this particular poster, if you want to buy it, anticipate paying over £4,000. So in 20 years, it's gone up by about 5 times, something like that.
Do we think that there is some kind of correlation there? I'm sure there is, with when people get to a certain point in their life. So, for example, they remember this film from their childhood, and suddenly when they get to the age of maybe mid-30s, 40s, where they've got the disposable income and possibly done relatively well, and they can afford, I'm going to buy the original poster from my favourite film of childhood. Is there some correlation with that in the way that the prices increase over time?
Spot on. That's exactly what happens. So people, when they reach their 30s and 40s, they get, like I said, it's a nostalgia market. So people start thinking, my favourite film's E.T., my favourite film's Back to the Future. If you look at the price increase in E.T., Back to the Future, The Goonies, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, those kind of 80s classic films that if you were brought up in the 80s or a child in the 90s, you probably watched, those prices have gone up 4 or 5 times in quite a quick period of time. It's literally exactly as you said. It's because those people now have disposable income, and that's what they want. They want to rebuy their childhood, the poster they remember seeing when they went to the cinema to watch their favourite film, and it's owning a piece of that film history and something that you love. So it is different in other markets in that personal connection. You'll have your favourite film. Everybody on this call will have their favourite film. And if you said to them, what would you like? And you're having a cinema, a lot of people would think, I want the movie poster from my favourite film. So it means that if money's no object to you, £4,000 seems a reasonable price. And it is a rare poster.
In terms of the way in which you authenticate these things, I mean, it's tricky, I presume, because effectively you are a modern print will be pretty much a direct copy of it, won't it?
It will. The difference when you're handling a lot of posters is you can tell by the stock of the paper. That might sound strange, but when you handle a lot, I used to be able to tell you what a poster was without even unfolding it. I could tell you folded, seeing through the back of the poster what movie it was for by the stock and sort of the year, and they're just handling a lot. So I think you're looking at paper stock. You're looking at how does it smell? That might sound really strange, but paper particularly picks up smell over time, which you can't fake, or it would be hard to fake. You could probably throw it in an attic for 5 years and wait. Modern reproductions tend to be on a sort of more laser jet copy stock, so they're shinier. They don't have the same nice finish. So I would always say buyer beware. But if you handle a lot of posters, you get to see key things that are replicated in every poster that you see because they were mass produced.
Were these screen printed then, or how were they made?
The early ones, so the Breakfast at Tiffany's one is lithograph. So it's stone
really?
litho.
Gosh.
Yeah, so they did the early ones lithography. So lithography, stone lithography is where you use wax to put the design on a sort of stone or clay tablet, and then you would print it that way. These more modern posters probably screen printed. The ones now, I presume they're just laser printed on big commercial printers. But I also wonder if over time, as film posters become used sort of less because there's more digital screens, if they will become more valuable because people want to own the kind of tangible object.
Shall we move on to the next slide?
Yeah, well,
please?
the next one I was going to show you on the basis of that, it's a bit of a different one, so slide 3. This is children queuing outside of a cinema in Chicago in 1941. And it was just as an indicator of how you can't really tell the difference between what's going to be valuable and what's not sometimes as the films are released. So they're all queuing outside the cinema. And if you can see in the little window that's in the middle of the photograph, they're advertising 2 films that are being shown at the cinema. One is a film called The Philadelphia Story, which is one of the most important films of the 1940s, starring Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn and Jimmy Stewart. The other is a film called Life with Henry, The Aldrich Family. Now, those children there could have gone into the cinema and said, can we have the poster for free? And the cinema would have likely said yes. If you're looking at The Aldrich Family, which was a series of films and radio plays that has gone into the mist of time, not many people have heard of that, where The Philadelphia Story, they would have done. So in the middle there, so you're now thinking about price. So you're thinking, I've just told you that the Aldrich Family poster, not many people have heard of it. The Philadelphia Story is the most important film, really, of the early 1940s. So the 2 little film posters in the middle, they're what's called window cards. So they're behind those windows, as it's in America. The Aldrich Family poster, if you wanted to buy that, you could buy that for £10 or £15. The Philadelphia Story, you'd be looking at £3,000 plus. The 2 big posters, which are called 3 sheets, I think there'll be 3 sheets. The Aldrich Family one, you're looking at £100. The Philadelphia Story one, I can't find that anywhere. So I think if that came to market, you'd be looking at £20,000 plus. So it just shows that I wouldn't be surprised if that made 30 or 40,000 if it came to market. So I think it was just to illustrate how things that were ephemeral, that would have been thrown away, that the children could have got for free, now are very valuable, really, if you're looking at them comparatively. But if you pick the wrong poster, you've picked something that's worth very little and you've kept it for nearly 80 years for basically no reason. So it's just to kind of indicate that, really.
But I suppose when you're looking at posters, what you're predominantly looking at, not only the film, but the stars that are in them. Obviously, in that, you've got 3 of the biggest names in Hollywood, haven't you? Yeah,
you have. So if I'm looking this year, which is what I sometimes do with props and movie memorabilia, I look ahead to what's happening this year. So this year, I know that there's The Crow is coming out, a new version of the film The Crow. There's a new version of Nosferatu and the new Joker movie. They'd be the 3 that I'd kind of be looking at and thinking, are they going to be the ones that, if they're well received, where the poster becomes kind of valuable in the future? So they're all the props. If we're moving on to props next, they're the kind of things that I'd be looking at.
But I presume, and I only know this from the comic book market, as soon as you have a new version of something being released, the old versions of the items automatically increase in value. So, for example, I imagine the original Crow film with, was it Brandon Lee?
It was Brandon Lee,
He died, didn't he, when that was being made? I think with that one, the original versions of that will probably be far more valuable as soon as the new version comes out, because it's jogged people's memory again, hasn't it?
That does happen with memorabilia markets, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the music memorabilia market later. But it does bump the value of once people kind of can reflect on how important something was, or remember the old thing, if they didn't before, the old version of the movie, or just have something trigger their mind to think about, oh yeah, the film, the Crow, the original, that was really great. So then they go back and think about it again. So if we can have the next slide. So you might.
Even I know what that is.
Even you know what this is.
Instantly.
Instantly.
Does it belong in a museum?
It does belong in a museum. So this, for people that don't know, and spoilers ahead for Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So this is the Holy Grail from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And in terms of, it's a movie prop from that film. And it was just to illustrate the proper genuine. If you actually watch how Indiana Jones treats the antiquities in the film, it's appalling. He wants everything to be in a museum, but he's happy to smash and break whatever he finds in order to get to the Holy Grail. surprisingly, in the UK, we're quite lucky in that you do see a lot of good, important props and movie costume because we have such a great history here of movie production. So because of Pinewood, Ealing Studios, Shepperton Studios, a lot of the great films like Star Wars and things were made in the UK. So it means we do have a lot of props and costumes here. One of the best costume makers in Europe, Angels the Costumier, they're based in here. They're based in Hendon. So you do get access here to really, the UK punches above its weight really in terms of film production. So if you're looking at props, you're going to see a lot more here than you might do in other countries. And this prop was just to sort of talk to people about props in general. Now, like you said, people are collecting props and costumes to put in their home as a sort of interest piece or a museum, part of their cinema. Provenance is absolutely key with any type of memorabilia, but particularly props. You just want to prove that it came off the set legitimately and that it was owned by the person since the film was in production. So this prop is to show you the increase in prop value, again, from things from the 90s and 80s. So the film The Last Crusade came out in 1989. This is made of resin. So most props are made of kind of inexpensive, easily accessed materials. They're just meant to fool the eye. They're not meant to be a precious object. So this was made of resin that then painted. In the mid-1990s, Christie's sold a version of the Grail, of which I would assume there'd be between 5 and 10, because that would be about right for a movie. It's, if you've never seen the film, the whole way through the film, they're looking for the Holy Grail. By the end of the film, they've found it, and it's in lots of scenes in the film at that point. But it is the focus of the film, so it's the main prop that the film revolves around, really, I think, that they're trying to achieve finding. So in the mid-1990s, you could have bought a version of the Holy Grail for £2,500. So if you'd have bought it in about 1995, 1996, by that time, the film had only been out for kind of 5 or 6 years. So people wouldn't necessarily have thought this is a future classic. If you'd have bought it for £2,500, you'd have been lucky. So a similar prop came up. This one came up last year. It was estimated at 30 to 50,000 US dollars. It sold for 93,000 US dollars. So between in that 30-year period, it's gone up such an enormous amount. It's sort of 40 times really. So if you bought that, you bought it well. And I honestly think with something like this, it will hold its value because it is the focus of the film. I was involved in the sale of a prop once for the film The Maltese Falcon, which similarly is about people chasing after the most valuable sculpture in the world. It's a 1940s film, and that sold for $3.2 million. So you can see that over time, as films become more important, the props themselves can become more valuable.
I suppose the question I would have with this, Steph, is you say there may be 5 or 10 of them made.
Yeah.
And I see a phrase used quite often with prop auctions, and that is screen matched.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So screen matched is when you basically take this prop, take the movie and go through it frame by frame every time that prop appears, or look at all the marks on it and see if you can screen match it, that it is the exact same one. So sometimes in films, you might know from the film history that something happened to a prop and it was damaged in a certain way, or it was chipped in the film, or these little losses that you can see on the cup of the bowl that would match the screen, because they won't all be exactly the same, the props. The next thing we're going to move on to, if we can have slide 5. That's okay, Steve, sorry. Yeah. So this is a pair of Dorothy's ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz. Now, this is a good example of when there are a few props made, how you can tell the difference. Judy Garland starred in the film, 1939, very famous film. One of the pairs of shoes, they know they're worn because they can see that they're the pair that she clicked her heels together with.
Oh, brilliant. So
although they wouldn't screen match necessarily, they can tell the back, the sequins on the back have been damaged. So with costume, again, with screen matching, you're looking at little incidents that may have happened if in the film someone's blown up or they're supposed to be shot, or there's, then it means there's damage to the fabric, so you can match them that way. So this pair of shoes is one of only a few known surviving pairs for the Wizard of Oz. They don't actually know how many pairs they made, but there's a funny story with them, so I thought I'd tell you. And it also, for insurance point of view, this pair were stolen. So it shows you what can happen when props are stolen. So they were lent in 2005 to the Judy Garland Museum as part of an exhibition. And while they were on that exhibition, they were stolen. Now, the thief thought that the ruby slippers were made of actual rubies. So he obviously didn't know much about prop making, because
Where was this exhibition?
it was in America.
There we go. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, carry on.
So he thought they were made of real rubies, and then when he got them home, he obviously realized, like most props, they're sequins, so he couldn't do anything with them. Now, for 13 years they were trying to find these shoes. That they were valued at the time at $1 million, and they had a reward out for them to be returned. The owner had owned them since the 80s. They were found in 2018 after a long police search, so they were given back to the owner. They're coming up for auction at the end of this year in Heritage in Dallas. They'll be sold in December. The estimate for them is $3 to $5 million US. And I wouldn't be surprised if they make nearer to over the 5 and nearer to 10. There was a pair offered at auction about sort of more than 10 years ago now. And I think they were purchased by a group of people, including Leonardo DiCaprio and Steven Spielberg, to be given to the Academy in America. And there's a pair, these were proved to be genuine, and the ones that have been stolen, because there's a pair in the Smithsonian, and they were compared with the pair in the Smithsonian. But it shows you, pardon?
I was going to say, I suppose the story surrounding these as well just adds to the infamy of them, doesn't it? And it almost increased the value, the fact that they were missing for however many years. Yeah,
and the fact that the gentleman that had them just sort of stole them and then didn't know what to do with them, really. So, because they are just really an old pair of shoes covered in sequins, but they have an interesting story, and these are the prop, really. I mean, if you ask anybody, can you name a pair of shoes in a movie? Can you name your favorite movie? Can you name an iconic scene in a movie? It's The Wizard of Oz. It's so many people's favorite film, and it is the most recognizable image from the film, The Ruby Slippers. So I think they're different than other kind of props in that most people know what The Wizard of Oz is, and for a lot of people is genuinely their favorite film.
When is the auction coming up, just in case any of us want to put a cheeky bid in?
If you want to put a cheeky bid in, it's in December and it's in Dallas. So if you can, I mean, why not fly if you're going to? Why not get your private jet and get out there if you're going to?
But did you say 10? Wouldn't be surprised if they reached $10 million.
No, the Cowardly Lion costume was sold by Bonhams about 9 years ago, and that made over $3 million US. And these are $3 to $5 million. When the shoes came up before, they were estimated similarly, but I think the market shifted since then. I could be wrong, but I wouldn't be surprised. I really do think they are really important. So we'll see. We will see. But I'll be, either way, they're $3 to $5 million estimate, but we'll see. But I wouldn't be surprised.
No, I think it's such a glorious thing. Glorious thing.
Yeah, and if you want one thing, and if money's no object to you, then why not? So I would say the point of this really is, if you've got clients with props or people looking at stuff, they should really be constantly having them reappraised, because the market can move, and where they might have been $1 million sort of 10, 12 years ago, Christie's had sold a pair, I think in the early noughties or late 90s for about £660,000 then. So but they're still moving all the time. So I would say with props, you've got to keep getting them looked at. You've got to keep getting them reappraised, just to see. Conversely, that can work against them if you buy from a movie that, because studios now have started realizing the value of their assets. So it used to be props like this, when The Wizard of Oz was finished, it was finished. So everything was just disposed of. Nobody thought anything was valuable. It was all just thrown away or given away or whatever. Now studios are very up on the fact that once a movie production ends, if you look at the auction that happened, I know it's TV, but it's similar, for The Crown that was held at Bonhams last year, that wouldn't have happened 20, 30 years ago, never mind 50 years ago. But now they kind of realise, OK, we've got something that's tangibly valuable. Rather than disposing of it, why don't we get some revenue back from the props and costumes from the production. So the next thing I was going to move on to is music memorabilia. That just looks like a white square, Alistair. I know you look confused.
No. I know the record too well, unfortunately, and the serial number in the bottom.
Yeah, the serial number in the bottom, that's it. So with music memorabilia, it's really similar to film memorabilia in that people want pieces that are the closest associated with the musician as they possibly can. So they want something that's an instrument they played, a lyric they wrote, you know, something that was handled by the star, and they want the musician that they love throughout their whole life and childhood normally, but it can just be someone who was influential on you. And again, a lot of the big collectors are people in the music business. As an artist's career grows, memorabilia can become more valuable. So if you see someone who's an up-and-coming star now, if you'd have looked at Adele kind of 20 years ago, you know, she would have been, 15, she was up-and-coming, now she's a global household name. So you just need to watch people's careers in music as it kind of grows on, then the memorabilia can become more valuable. The recent Freddie Mercury auction at Sotheby's is a really good indicator of the draw that music memorabilia can bring. Sotheby's had a memorabilia department and then they got rid of it and hadn't had one for about kind of 15 years. And I think they're now looking back at getting into that market more strongly, because that sale had 150,000 people come through the view, and I know it had sort of tens of thousands of people register to bid. That's not usual, and that's the power that music memorabilia can bring if people think they can get something associated with a star and with their favourite musician.
And it is remarkable because going back to the Freddie Mercury sale, I mean, there are a lot of, I'm not going to say kind of run-of-the-mill items, but a friend of mine bought a console table from the Freddie Mercury sale that would have been maybe £5,000, maybe £8,000, but paid £30,000 for it because it belonged to Freddie Mercury. And it's just that association, isn't it?
Yeah, there was a clock in there, and it was a sort of a chinoiserie clock, but it was just like a Smith's clock that you'd see in a normal auction, less than £100. And I can't remember what it made, but it made way over about £2,000 or £3,000. And I thought if you wanted to buy that clock, it wouldn't be hard to buy it, but that's not the point. The point is it's Freddie Mercury's clock, and it was in his house, and it's part of that auction. One of the most surprising lots in that sale were all the little cat ornaments that he collected from all around the world, and they were really in a normal auction. Well, you and I know they'd have been in a job lot and they would have been next to nothing really, but because they were his and because he loved cats and because of all the romance of the association with Freddie Mercury, just the prices were just so unbelievably strong, and all the estimates were kind of pointless really, because everything was making so much more. So I think that's the thing, like you said before, that it's difficult to gauge, but you can try. You can look for market comparables. You can see where similarly provenance pieces have come up before. But when it's a single owner sale, you can never fully quantify how much extra interest that generates when it is. There's been sales in the past of kind of Jackie Kennedy's pieces or big names where it just brings a different atmosphere to the auction than it would do otherwise. So this piece was to illustrate two things really. It's the power of that kind of provenance, and again, a new, it's not a new market, but it's been an emerging market over the past 20 years, and that's vinyl. So there's a lot more people collecting vinyl. If you're, especially among younger people, surprisingly, serious vinyl collectors want records that haven't been played. They want them in mint condition and often sealed. This vinyl was different because this was part of Ringo Starr's collection. It was sold in 2015 when Ringo and Barbara Bach had a big sale in America at Julien's in LA. This is a Beatles album. It's called The Beatles, but it's known as the White Album because of its white sleeve. Each album was numbered, which you can see on the bottom right-hand corner. This one is the White Album #1. Now, before this, I'd only ever seen 5 and 9 sold, but so this is the lowest possible number you can get. I assume, don't know, no one knows, but I assume the Beatles would have each got one and it would each be #1. I don't think Ringo would have had one, John would have had #4 or something, but I think it's the lowest number that you can get. Anything under 10,000 is worth looking at in terms of value, and if it's under 1,000, then it's a good value, and under 100 it's even more. So all the different white albums are value. This one came up at what I thought was quite a modest $40,000 to $60,000 when it came up. It eventually sold for $790,000 US. It's one of the most expensive vinyl records ever sold. And there's been other pieces of music memorabilia recordings that have made more, only one or two pieces, but I think this is the most expensive piece of vinyl that's ever been sold. If you're looking at collections, though, I would say reappraise them, get your clients to look at them. There are really good books you can get. There's a thing called Record Collector Rare Record Price Guide. If you've got clients that say, we've got vinyl, we think it's valuable, they should be able to get a bit of a gauge what their vinyl's worth from that. And if they've got anything unusual, you can get things like test pressings that were done prior to a record's release, demonstration pressings which were sent to record shops to play, and things like acetates where they were just printed there and then given to people. So record prices can vary, and there are things that are more obscure or would be harder to get hold of, but looking at vinyl collections I think is important. They're often overlooked, and they can be quite valuable.
And Discogs is another really good source for information online. You can get some great stuff. And what I found tremendously fascinating with the vinyl market, when vinyl was hugely unpopular, at a point where CDs were really taking over, bands didn't really produce vinyl records. So if you go back to kind of records from my kind of point of buying music, I suppose in the kind of early to mid 90s, bands weren't really producing them. So if you find the original pressings of, Blur's first or second record on vinyl from 90 and 93, you're going to be paying a lot of money for that because they just didn't make that many of them.
No, it's completely true. When I was a little girl, I went to a fete and I bought like some Led Zeppelin record off a man. I was about 12 for about £1. And I think that record's worth about £150 now, but it was just because he didn't want them anymore because he'd got CDs now. And I just thought it was cool artwork. So I think it's surprising with vinyl, and especially because there seems to be more and more young people coming into the marketplace, it will just increase the value over time, especially for those scarce pieces. The market for memorabilia is really still dominated by the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, with then people from the 70s like the Sex Pistols, people like Joy Division, who sometimes get overlooked if you don't know about them, but they're very valuable. But looking forward to the market now, I like to look at growth markets. And if you look at things like Amy Winehouse memorabilia, Nirvana memorabilia, similar to the movie we were talking about, because it's a younger demographic who are then coming into a bit of more disposable income, it does increase the prices. And things like the Amy Winehouse biopic that just came out, as with, I think, the Bohemian Rhapsody biopic that came out about Freddie Mercury, it means more people appreciate and understand the career of that person and how important it was. So if we look at slide 7, okay, so this
Biggy. We all love Biggy.
Exactly. We all love Biggy. So this is the Notorious B.I.G. In a iconic photo shoot called The King of New York that was taken by Baron Claiborne in 1997. It's one of the that can't be right. I've written that can't be right. 1997. But it's a famous photo shoot of Notorious B.I.G. Now, the thing that's interesting about this is Sotheby's are now holding dedicated hip hop auctions. It's something they do once a year. I've always thought hip hop was a growth market. It was being overlooked, but if you look at music in the 21st century, hip hop has been the most influential. The artists have the biggest following, and the people that collect to do with it are serious. And the influence that it's had on kind of pop culture, fashion, art, everything. These kind of figures are really important now. So when I worked at Bonhams, we were selling Tupac Shakur lyrics and things, and they were fetching good money. But the money that they would fetch now, I think, would be
astronomical, wouldn't it?
Astronomical, yeah. So this it's a plastic crown he's wearing. It was picked by the photographer for the photo shoot, but it was estimated in 2020 for $200,000 to $300,000 US, and it eventually sold for $594,000 US. So if you've got clients collecting hip hop memorabilia, for the really good stuff, for the recognizable stuff, for the rare, as I said, with the rare recordings, the most expensive recording ever sold was not that White Album. It was a Wu-Tang Clan recording that sold for over $2 million. So I think hip hop market is a growth area. It's one to watch when the auctions come up. Have a look. And just see where the market is moving, because I do think it's moving towards these kind of iconic figures from the late 90s.
I was about to use that word iconic, and I think the word iconic and legendary gets thrown around so much these days. Yeah, it's iconic. It's not. But that image was, at the time, I think that's probably what, 93-ish, something like that, maybe, because I think he died.
I think it's about 90 sort of 5-ish, but I've written 97, but I can't think that that's right. But anyway, it will be.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. I mean, that was the quintessence of hip hop at the time, really, wasn't it? With him and Tupac and whatnot, and that whole kind of East Coast West Coast thing.
Yeah.
That I'm not going to pretend to know huge amounts about, strangely, but it was very much that kind of. That was it at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, and if you look at that influence, it's really interesting. Even through kind of fashion, there's a designer called Dapper Dan who did all the designs of all the kind of Louis Vuitton multi-logo jackets and things you saw. Dapper Dan created them. Louis Vuitton didn't exist. Those brands didn't create garments with multi-logos on them. It just didn't exist. And they tried to shut him down and stop him from doing it, where now he's a creative director at Gucci, because even though he was selling it out of his car boot, and they shut him down and made him close his shop, now the work that he did really through hip hop artists spread those brands to I was right, it is 1997, thank you, the image is 1997. It spread those brands to a wider audience and a wider appreciation of the luxury of those brands. So when you're looking at shows now, the Dior catwalk show last week, Miss Dior all over everything, that I think that really is because of hip hop. So I think it permeates through everything in modern culture.
But no money, no problems.
That's it. Well, that's it. But so if I'm looking at growth markets now, I'm looking at somebody like Beyonce, thinking that, there's no way that anything that's relating to Beyonce is going to be of lower value in the future. And if I was looking at UK, I would think Sex Pistols is very valuable now. Again, relating to fashion, relating to Vivienne Westwood, because she was involved in the creation of the band and dressed them. So there's a lot of crossover there. But I'd be looking at UK grime, trap, drill artists and wondering if in the future, because they're so influential now, are pieces that they wore that, and if also crossover now, if you look at Stormzy at Glastonbury,
the Banksy vest,
where wore a vest that was designed by Banksy. So there is a lot of crossover between art collecting and music collecting. There always has been. I mean, if you look at the Beatles, Peter Blake created Sgt. Pepper album cover. And there's always been we were talking about Blur, the Think Tank album. Banksy did the artwork for that album. When I worked at Bonhams, we sold it for what seems like now cheap, about 400,000, which at the time was a record for a Banksy. But now, I don't even know what that would be worth. So there's a lot of crossover between art, music, the collectors, and because now I think, like I said, there's no canon. Art, music, film, it all kind of blends together with fashion, and it means that the collectors of one thing can be a collector of another thing, and it all kind of mixes together. So where am I next? So the next one, if we can have the next slide. So this is to do with autographed memorabilia. So a lot of your clients will have signed pieces in their collections, I would think. I mean, it might be just because you went around collecting when you were a child, or it might be because you've bought them. But I'd say even more so possibly than the prop and costume market, the autograph market is where most fakes abound. If you're going on the internet now looking for signed memorabilia, there'll be genuine pieces for sure, but there'll be a lot of fakes around. Sometimes no malice intended. The Beatles didn't like signing, they got bored of it, so that a lot of their road manager and different members of their team would sign for them. They didn't intend to deceive the fans, but you meet a lot of people who say, oh no, I was there and I saw them sign, but they were there and they saw the Beatles and they saw the thing get given to the Beatles, but they didn't ever see it get signed. So I think just watch out. Even with a good provenance, it doesn't necessarily mean a piece is genuine. So, and some names with autographs now, they've what I call gone off into the mists of time. They might have been very famous at the time, but now they're not particularly widely known and therefore not widely collected. So this album is a Beatles signed copy of the album Please Please Me from 1963. Normally with autographs, sometimes a dedication can devalue it. It depends on how personal the dedication is. But if it's got a nice inscription or something a bit longer, that adds value. So this one had a good provenance relating to a member of a camera crew filming the Beatles for like ABC or something. So it meant that there's a bit of a more personal connection there. With Beatles autographs, you can actually date them by the way that they're signed. You don't even need to know when the person says they had it signed. The handwriting changed in very incremental ways over the course of their career. So this album, when it came up at auction, sold for £23,000 last year. But a signed Please Please Me album, you're typically looking at kind of 10 to 20,000. 23 is quite a high price. But if you're getting a Beatles piece, the later the signatures, the more valuable, because they stopped touring in 1966 and very rarely appeared together after that time. So unless you were in the immediate circle of the group, there was absolutely no way you'd be able to get them to sign anything. So if you're getting a signed Sgt. Pepper album, for example, you're going to be, because that's later, that's going to be sort of more like 50,000, just because it didn't really happen. You wouldn't have seen them together. And I've never really seen, or only once or twice, the very later albums signed by the Beatles at all. So all the signatures you'll see will be from 1963-4, really. So if the majority of Beatles autographs, I would say, are fake, and like I say, for no malice intended, so only buy from reputable auction houses and dealers, and provenance is important, but not as important as them being authenticated by someone who knows what they're talking about.
Fascinating. And I think, as you were saying earlier, what's interesting is that, and I'm sure you probably have the same scenario, you would get autograph books in that come in to be sold, for example, and you'd go through about 30 pages of people that unfortunately have such little relevance today that they're of no value whatsoever. But then you'll come on one page of, I don't know, the Stones with Brian Jones or the Beatles, and then there's suddenly some value to them.
That's it. And some of these bands played like random venues. When Jimi Hendrix came over to the UK, he played random small venues up north and places that were quite obscure. So people might have had access to him on that day, but they were just lucky, really. And the other people that came and toured that venue that then went off and weren't Jimi Hendrix, nobody ever heard of them ever again. So they would all be in the same book. The funny thing is, the autograph books that I used to find, especially with the Beatles, tended to be collected by women and girls. They were the fans, they were the ones that followed them around. But the collectors now tend to be majority men. So it's the women collected all the signatures at the time, but it's now the Beatles market really is a lot of male buyers in general, just because I think it's been such an influential group and important to a lot of people's lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the last bit, well, the second to last bit I was going to talk about, so if on the next slide. Okay, so is sports memorabilia, which is very different market to music and film, because within sports, it's so broad. It's such a broad church. There are lots of different individual markets within sports memorabilia, be it football, be it cricket, be it golf, Formula One. It all counts as sports, but they're very different collecting fields. For example, if I'm looking at cricket, golf and horse racing, antiques and fine art fall into those fields. Really, they are sports memorabilia in inverted commas, despite the fact it might be a George Stubbs painting of a famous racehorse or an Alfred Munning's painting of a race, which are important artists in the history of British painting, but they're also collected by sports memorabilia collectors who collect racehorses and flat racing or jump racing, anyway. So this piece was just to show you something a bit different. So this is where markets can become overlooked, but are very valuable. So I don't know if anybody knows what this is, but it is a baseball card. So in America, particularly, they release baseball cards that you could collect with all your favourite players on, and then you could keep them. I guess the way people would have done Pirelli football stickers, when you put them in their album, it's a similar sort of thing to that. Now, if you're going into people's homes and they have smaller pieces of what I would call ephemera, they're items that were kind of disposable, collected maybe by children and then thrown away. They weren't meant to be kept as treasured items. Now, you're looking at this piece and I bet you're wondering, What's it worth? Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about this sort of thing, just because it's a different field of sports memorabilia, and it's just to make people aware. Don't ignore anything you see. If you think it might be valuable, get it appraised. So this is a 1952 Mickey Mantle Topps baseball card. It's one of a rare set of baseball cards from the top. I won't go into all the history of Topps baseball cards because it's very specific, so I won't go into that. But it was discovered in 1985 by a baseball card dealer. It was sold to the previous owner in 1991 for a record at the time of $50,000 in 1991. It came to auction in 2022. Now, the Mickey Mantle baseball card, I will tell you, there are lots of baseball cards that can make over $100,000. This baseball card is the most expensive piece of sports memorabilia that's ever been sold. So it sold in 2022 for $12.6 million. So it just shows that with sports memorabilia, if you don't know the market, it's something that there's an episode of a sitcom I watched where you watch someone throwing a load of things in the bin because they think they're not worth anything, and one of them's a Mickey Mantle baseball card. So it's just with sports memorabilia, like other memorabilia markets, it can be difficult to gauge what things are worth. But if something is rare enough and it relates to people's favourite star, and this one was the highest grade baseball card you can get, a bit like comic books, they grade them. So don't overlook anything. If you think something might be valuable, it could well be. It's just, things can surprise you, especially in the memorabilia market. So the last thing I was going to show you is, again, it's a crossover piece. So this is something which could be considered memorabilia. It could be considered literature. It's coming up in a library sale in Sotheby's, New York, late next month. It's the original artwork for the Harry Potter book, the first Harry Potter book, The Philosopher's Stone. Now, with this, it is kind of crossover for me for memorabilia, because it would be collected by a movie collector, someone who's a big fan of the books. It's an illustration art for a cover, so it falls into kind of a different bracket than your normal piece of kind of what would be considered a literature sale or a book and manuscript sale. This piece was bought, it was executed in 1997 for the cover. It was sold originally for a then extremely high price at Sotheby's of just over £85,000. It's being offered when it comes for sale next month with an estimate of $400,000 to $600,000. So, and again, I wouldn't be surprised if you see it kind of tipping over that top estimate, just because Harry Potter market is such a strong market, be it movies or be it literature. There is a big crossover between the two, and anything that comes up from the movie makes a very strong price. All the first edition books now are thousands of pounds, particularly for the first book. So I think this one will be one to watch when it comes up next month. And that was it, really. So that was most of my pieces of memorabilia that I had to show you.
Fantastic. That's been fascinating.
Yeah, a good sort of broad brush of kind of lots of different types of things that you might see. Some of them, if you see them, wow, you're very lucky. But some of them with things like vinyl and posters, you're more likely to see that if you're going out and about.
But it gives you a great example, and hopefully for our viewers, a really good example of the fact that there is just tons of stuff out there, and there are situations that they may find themselves in speaking to a client, and it really is important to get this stuff looked at, even if they've bought it in the past or had items similar sold in the past. In the last 20 years, this market has evolved so much.
Yeah, that's it. I think it's surprising even to me, because I used to look at things, and I often look at things like, oh, it's cheap at 200,000, and you think, that's a crazy thing to think, but then really it isn't, because you're thinking longer term. You're thinking today you might be able to pick this up for 100,000, but would you be able to pick it up again in 5 years' time for that same amount of money? And I think that's not the case, and that's true of this type of memorabilia market. But also I handle a lot of royal memorabilia, and that can be the same for royal memorabilia depending on what it is. So memorabilia in general is a massive area. I could have also talked about space memorabilia, which this year, because it's the anniversary of the moon landing, will be something that a lot of people will be looking at. So, but particularly movies and music, watch out when you're going to see clients. Is it something that you recognise? If not, can you figure out that it's important? And if they're investing in props and costumes now from modern productions, in 5 years' time, as I say, they could be very valuable, but they could also conversely not be. So it's just keeping an eye on how the market's moving and what the prices are doing, because they might be surprised by something that they bought in 2005 is now worth just sort of 10 times more or more than they bought it for.
Absolutely. We're running short on time. I think we've got about 4 minutes left. Have we got any questions from the floor? I think we've probably got time for a couple of quick questions if there's anything there.
Hey, yeah. You mentioned comic books and how they do like grading and stuff. Would you say that the grading itself is not necessarily a thing? Because, for example, if you take the first edition of Superman, it's in an utterly atrocious condition, but it's still making like millions upon millions when it's being sold. So would you say it is, even though obviously the better condition that it's in, the more likely you are to make money, but again, it's sort of like on a sliding scale, like depending on when it is.
Yeah, exactly. So if you took that Mickey Mantle baseball card, that one's the best condition one that exists. But even the one that's like in a worse condition, it's still kind of $3 million or $1 million for a not particularly good condition one. So you're exactly right. It's the same with posters. It's the same with comic books. It's the same with anything that's kind of paper ephemera. It's graded on the condition, and it is a sliding scale. If it's mint, then it's going to be worth more than if it's in poor condition, but something in poor condition still doesn't mean it's valueless. So so I would just watch out for where the condition is and bear that in mind when you're thinking about value. But it doesn't mean something's not any value at all, not at all.
You know, the husband's covered the walls in graded comics, so I just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, no, honestly, if it's in bad condition, it doesn't really matter. It's all about scarcity. Condition is a factor, so it's scarcity, popularity, and condition are the kind of things that merge together. If you get something that's got all three, then that's the highest value. But even if something's poor condition, then it's scarce, so that's still going to pull the value up.
Right. OK. Unfortunately, we're going to have to cut it short because our meeting will cut off in about a minute and a half, because I think you're only allowed an hour and 10 minutes on these things. But alas, thank you ever so much to everyone for joining us. And thank you ever so much for Steve for having us again. And we will see you for the next one very shortly. So, Steph, thank you ever so much for joining us. And as I say, if you have any questions that you'd like to put to us that you didn't manage to get through on the webinar, please do just jot them down on an email and send them to our email address. Obviously, any inquiries with regards to valuations that your clients need doing, please do get in touch, and we'll no doubt help you along the way with that.
Thanks, Alistair. What I just add to that is I think as brokers, we're a little bit guilty probably about not asking about memorabilia. We ask pictures and paintings and brown furniture and gold, silver and jewellery. We don't ask that question. So I'm going to go away and have a little think about maybe changing our fact finds to update them to
because I think you'll find sometimes with memorabilia, I've gone into lots of houses and they've got very good art, very good furniture. The memorabilia will far outstrip the value of anything else that's in the property. So it just depends where you are and what you're looking at, really. But that can be the case.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks ever so much, Steve. Thanks,
guys.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.